family. Sia and CFNC, it's great to have you on this morning for the Residence Liaison update. I'm going to be honest, today is going to probably be one of the shortest meetings you will ever have. Um, let's see, I'm going to cut my camera off, someone like a little white ghost. Um, I had asked for um, I had asked for the colleges provide some questions or some concerns if they had it. So we did not receive any questions. If I'm not correct and you did send me something, please speak up and go ahead and let me know what it is that you did and what you provided. But from what I'm seeing, I didn't receive any questions. And so this question section of the meeting we don't have. So what I'm going to do is I am going to open it up to everyone uh, to ask if you do have anything that you wanna request or ask of the group. Go ahead and do so. I will say part of the reason you may not have questions is because Gene Ritter has done such a great job on the trainings the past few semesters that he's probably answered a lot of your questions. And so it's great that he's been around and he could provide you insight and resources to your needs. So if you have any questions, I will go ahead and take a minute. I'll pause for a minute or two to allow you the opportunity to ask questions or concerns, or if you want to put it in the chat and I will read it out to everyone and get a response from Gene or Tracy.
I have a question. This is Jessie at South Piedmont.
Hey, Jesse. Yes, ma'am.
Hey. I was talking with our VA certifying person here at South Piedmont yesterday. I guess they had a residency meeting with Gene yesterday, and we were kind of going back and forth. With the Veterans Choice Act, the veteran using the benefit has to live in North Carolina in order to get the tuition adjustment, correct? They cannot live in South Carolina?
Jesse, that's come up twice recently, one of them from one of the UNC campuses. And what I have said is I would defer to your state certifying VA official, because if they award it, it's good. If they say no, it's not. So it really isn't an RDS decision. I would let them know they're supposed to. Now, the question came up, what if they're enrolled, but then they move, but my understanding is they're supposed to be living in North Carolina. So, but I would, anytime you have a VA award, it's going to hinge on whether or not the VA awards it. So I would direct that question to your state certifying representative.
So, and I just go by the guidebook, and in there it says in order for us to apply the waiver, they have to satisfy all of these things. And the last two are the veteran's abode is North Carolina, and the veteran provides a statement saying that they intend to make North Carolina their home. So
right, that's true, but then all of that is just reflecting what's in federal law. The federal law says if the VA awards it, you must give the exception. No way around it. I think at this point, if you tell them this is the case, and they say, okay, we're going to do it, it's not your decision, it's not mine, it's the federal law, trumps that. So I would put it in their lap.
Okay, so they need to run everything by the VA state certifying official.
If you have anyone like that. Now, someone told me that they had a case where they allowed it because it was a temporary absence or this or that. But again, they're the ones that make that determination. The law just basically says the college must adjust the tuition if they have an award. So if you think that questions the eligibility of just as, for example, they have to, they can't just take any course in the world. It's got to be, certain things in a program. I would direct that question to them. Do they feel it's eligible? Because ultimately they audit campuses periodically about how you've done this with the various vets, and they audit files to see that you're in compliance. I would, that's really on them.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. Joanna Brown has a question.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Got brought up a similar situation here at Durham Tech because we're being told that the veterans can't be certified unless we attach the waiver. So I was curious about how that might work if we go back to the agency to see if they would be awarded, but our office is telling us that they can't be awarded unless we apply the waiver first.
I think that's backwards because, I mean, if you, well, I mean, you can't bill them as out of state, but it's contingent on the waiver, you know, and we've had students argue this. We've gone through all the state VA. We went to the VA in DC and they confirmed that there is no requirement for a waiver unless the student uses a benefit. So I guess it's a timing issue, John, based on what you're saying of, you know, the award. But I think if there's any question about the award, for example, if the student has indicated to you they're not living in North Carolina, but indicating the VA that they are, you know, that's something I would discuss with them about what should you do. Because really, as I say, it's the federal law that is involved here. We're just trying to mirror and be in compliance with it. So I think at any of those where there's a question, I would direct it to your state certifying officials, you know, for the VA programs and ask them, what should we do? Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Ultimately, they're the ones that will come in and audit schools periodically and look at the records and see that everything was, you know, in compliance.
Okay. Any other questions?
This is Michelle from Coastal, and this is kind of a follow-up question. If ultimately it depends upon if the student is awarded or receiving a VA award, then is it necessary for the colleges to maintain anything other than proof that they have like a certificate of eligibility or whatever, that they have the award?
Again, I'm going to defer you to the VA because they're the ones that audit that. We're just simply, in these cases, trying to give guidance and put something in the guidebook to help colleges be in compliance. So they do come around. I know they look for things like, you know, do you have a copy of the DD-214? They look to see that the courses were approved, things like that. So again, that's not something we would look at. It's a VA requirement. I would direct those questions to your VA certifying folks because they're the ones that will come around. It might be years in between, but periodically they do come in and look at those files for anyone who received a VA benefit.
So if our VA office is telling us that we do not need this letter of intent, then we no longer need that letter of intent. It is the VA office that would be responsible for having that, maintaining that, and that kind of thing. Or is it something that the system office is going to come and look for from?
No, you're still responsible if the VA, that has to be done, I believe, at the campus level. But again, I'm not expert on the VA. You've got to ask them those questions.
Right.
I believe that the school has to maintain that on file. Okay. Because it's really tied to the school, because there's something in there about the student's supposed to be living in the same state as the Institute of Higher Learning. So, and that they're supposed to be in the process of establishing a residence. That's a VA requirement, nothing to do with us or the system office. So
Right.
you need to check with them. And my understanding is, yes, you need to collect certain documents or document certain things when the award is there. That, you know, you're checking that their studies are approved and so forth, and the benefit is in place. So again, I would, you know, they're the ones that come around and audit, the VA folks.
Yeah, the system office wouldn't audit something like that. That's required for VA. We only audit things that are state board code.
Right. So I would, if you're not sure what that is, check with your state certifying VA official and ask them, can we review what the requirements are in terms of the campus keeping records for these VA awards?
Well, great questions. Any more?
Yeah. I mean, the reason we touch on it in the guidebook and so forth is to make sure everyone's aware that they are, if they're awarded, they're required to have a tuition exception. Now, if they're a resident and they meet full criteria for residents, there's no need for an exception. You know, whether or not they have an award, great. That's just a separate, financial aid issue. The question is the billing adjustment is required in federal law if they use a benefit.
Yeah, that's the part that scares me a little bit, because they want us to apply the in-state tuition before they do the certifying. And I'm like, so what if they change their mind after you've already done that, and back and forth? And
that's been a problem. We've had people that tell you they have a benefit and they don't, or they've used it up, or they weren't assigned one. That's why, like, once a year, I'm going to get into this in my presentation to remind people, once a year, check to see if they haven't exhausted that. We have a lot of times, there's a family went to UNC recently, one of the campuses, and the veteran divided the benefit between 3 daughters, I think it was. They're all in 3 different states. Well, one here, they each got 1 year's worth. Well, they're looking to get in state for the rest of their career. Well, not unless they establish a domicile. It's tied to the benefit. And part of that requirement of signing a statement is they're supposed to be in the process of establishing one. It's supposed to help people that, they discharge from the military, they move frequently and have time to establish a residence. So it's always tied to the benefit.
Any more questions? So we'll transition to Tracy Mitchell. Do you have any updates, Tracy?
Hey, Monty, I just have the statistics I sent to you very last minute.
Let me see if I can find them then. Hold on.
I literally emailed them to you probably like 15 minutes ago, but I can pull it up on my screen if you'd like.
Hold on, let's see if I can. Do you see that? Do you see them?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the annual statistics. Let me pull it up here. Yeah. Yep. So, you guys can just ponder over this. It's not anything very remarkable. There was a slight increase in the number of students that use RDS for the fiscal year ending June 30 over last fiscal year. There's not a whole lot notable in the fiscal year statistics. There's a little bit of a decrease in the military students that were found military, and then a slight increase in in-state and out-of-state. So the ages stayed pretty regular. The student breakdown by age a little bit shifted from 18 to 23 over to 17 or younger, and a little bit of an increase in the older population, 50 and up. So we did have a year over year the number of calls to the call center going down by about 12%, which, it's a good thing. If you want to pull up if you want to pull the quarterly statistics up, that's tells a little bit of a different story. As far as at least the phone calls, because you'll notice at the bottom that the first quarter of the year, we had an increase in the number of phone calls to the RDS call center. Don't know exactly what the reason for that is, but it could be that it just kind of evens out over the year. The rest of it a slight increase in the number of students that are using RDS over last year. Again, not that notable. We did have a larger increase in the number of non-residents for, as opposed to the resident military determinations going down. I do think some of that has to do with the continuing effect of continuous enrollment, where students that are a resident, they don't have to come back in and do RDS again. I'm not sure about the decrease in the military. So if you look at the age breakdown, the 17 and younger is taken from. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm hearing you. Go ahead.
Yeah, the 17 and younger is going up compared to the 18 to 23, and the 50 and older is still up over last year. So that's interesting. Don't know exactly the reason for it. I do.
Could that be more older people, or
It
older
is.
people are going back to college?
Yeah, that's what it looks like.
Yeah.
Well, why I don't know, but it's interesting. If you want to look, I have one other thing that it's kind of not official. I can just tell you without showing it that I pulled for college application week. I don't have the full statistics yet. I just got the raw numbers today. But we hope to have that out within the next couple of weeks. The total number of students that use RDS during college application week this year was 17,541, as opposed to last year being 15,236. So it does look like we had more people in college application week this year than last year. Also, the week prior to college application week, we noticed that it looks like students are starting to do their RDS ahead of the application, which would make sense to get that out of the way, instead of trying to do it all at the same time. So last year, in the week before college application week, we had 7,675 students using RDS, where this year we had 9,603. So we had a pretty significant increase in students that were doing RDS the week before college application week.
So aren't high schools breaking it down, the process down? Maybe they do 1 week where you do RDS, the next week you do application. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like they've caught on that that's the thing to do.
Yeah.
So that's what it looks like. But overall, between the 2 weeks, we are up. Let's see, between the 2 weeks, this year we had 27,144, and then last year we had 22,911.
Oh yeah, that's up. Wow.
Yep. So we had a good college application week. Everything went pretty smoothly, and we were pretty happy with how it turned out. Like I said, we'll have some better, more detailed statistics about college application week in the coming week or so.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Any questions for Tracy? Anyone?
I have a question for Tracy. I think it's for Tracy. And it's regards to like state grant eligibility and expiring RDS. So for instance, we have a student who's enrolled. Their residency certification expired in February of this year, but they have continuous enrollment locally in college through February of next year. Since technically their RCN is expired, should that affect state grant eligibility, or because they have continuous enrollment, is that fine?
The grants will still flow on an expired RCN. It's getting to the point where, most people should have that continuous enrollment
Right.
going for them with clearinghouse, but we're leaving it to the colleges to make sure that if they have an expired RCN, that they have been continuously enrolled since that RCN expired, and that they enrolled prior to the RCN to the RCN expiring.
Okay, so
So
locally, like, they can still be awarded those as long as the college identifies that they've been continuously enrolled?
That's
Yes.
right. That's the current policy. It could change later.
Uh-huh.
When it looks like really everybody out there is going through the process with clearinghouse.
Mhm.
But for now, that's correct.
And
Okay,
that's called it's a certification process, right?
Right.
Yeah.
okay. Because we
Tracy's
have,
G-
go ahead.
Sorry, Tracy's Gene, I wanted to ask about, I think the exception would be if they have a visa that expired, right?
Right.
Now,
Right.
the other reason you may be getting them is, let's say they, the determination was going to expire, but they haven't enrolled yet, but they do before it expires. It, you
Mhm.
know, may not have been picked up. They didn't enroll right away after they got the determination. There could have been a gap. So it
Mhm.
might pick them up. Well, if it hasn't expired, it may pick them up in December when it's run. So
Mhm.
sometimes it's, if they defer attendance for a while, that's why it might not have been picked up before now.
Yeah,
And
we're
it's a
seeing,
timing issue too, because like, and that's one reason we don't really enforce that expired issue in grants, because like, for example, this past time when we went to get our clearinghouse file, it was quite delayed, significantly delayed, because the clearinghouse had been hacked, and it caused
Okay.
a big delay. So during that time, people were getting expired. So we don't really enforce that for grants.
Gotcha. So
But you
if we
said
want to,
student, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, we just don't have a process in place to contact, except for like manually, reaching out to these students and saying, hey, go fill it out again. So I was just wondering what other schools were doing, but it sounds
Right.
like it's just, okay. Thank
But
you.
again, if they continuously enrolled, they shouldn't have to go through that process again.
Okay. Gotcha. Thank you.
This is
Any other-
Shelby at Beaufort. Our stop out process catches them once their RCN and their continuous enrollment expires.
Ours does too. Well, I think it catches them when they're not continuously enrolled. So that'll close the program. And usually when we tell them they have to reapply or whatever, we'll let them know, hey, make sure you update your RCN as well. So I think.
Great conversation. Anyone else has questions for Tracy? All right, Jane, we're going to transition to you. You're up next.
Hello again.
Hello.
So quickly, not a lot here, but one of the reasons I had to hold off about the guidebook and all that was I became aware that the budget that went through the legislature was greatly expanded to include a lot of other legislation, including things related to RDS. So I held off so I didn't have to revise it yet again. Now that I have it, I'm working on this again. The change that went in, this is not anything significant, but if you hear about it, there was change at a federal level about, the provision we have for active duty military stationed here. Interestingly, it came up, they changed it at a federal level to allow for spouses. We've always recognized spouses and dependents. Apparently the federal legislation only included the service member and the dependent children, but not the spouse. We've always done it, so that's in place. There's another change. They're changing the title of the act. It's not just about active duty now, but it talks about, this is where I think we're going to have a lot of misunderstanding, but specific federal employees, but it is limited only to someone classified as, and they give a statute, I'll reference this, a foreign service worker. For the most part, these are people who work in like consulates and embassies abroad, But there are a handful of small offices outside of DC. There's one in Virginia, there's one in Atlanta, but they have to meet that criteria. As far as my research has gone, I can't find evidence of anyone in North Carolina, but I guess if someone has that classification and works from home, they will now be allowed, it doesn't go into effect till next year, to be allowed the same privileges as the active duty military, that out in, if they're not claiming North Carolina as their home. I'll explain all this in the guidebook. We're going to start implementing it. I can't find evidence that there's anyone in the state currently that meets that. But you know, the option would be there. And also, like, if those people are working abroad and they have a residence here, they wouldn't lose it. Well, we already do that for anyone. That it could be a civilian or whatnot. They take a year off to work abroad or do missionary work or whatever. They wouldn't necessarily lose there. So no huge changes. But if you hear something about federal workers, it is very, very specific. So it's not your other federal employees. So and we're already taking care of the spouse of the active duty military. We've done that since 1984. I had to research it. The legislature asked, if we've done it, how long, but it technically doesn't go into effect the next year. Other change, if you hear about it, is, and this has gone to the legislature several times over the last several years, there is a pilot program for one community college, Tri-County, to allow a pilot program of residents of neighboring Georgia counties, specific ones named in law, to get an in-state tuition if attending Tri-County, if they're a resident of those counties. So the school would have to verify that they're a legal resident of those counties and so forth. And then, the legislature is going to monitor that as a pilot. Again, if you hear something about, because I live in another state, I get in state, no, it's specific to that one college and it's a trial, and you have to live in particular designated counties. So that's in law and goes to effect this term, actually. So if there's any questions about that, Tri-County, I know the system office already talked to you, let us know. But it's very specific. So if you hear any things about, oh, I heard something, like a lot of times people will hear, oh, I heard all federal workers, no. Those are the big changes. There were several other bills, as usual, to try to, we had another inquiry today or last week about, someone saying, well, how come they have to give parent information? There were several bills introduced to try to open this up for folks that might not have an eligible immigration status, or to not give parent information, or just base it on a high school graduation. There were 3 such bills introduced, none of them exempt, move forward, none of them advanced. The only change in that was a few years back, they gave the high school exception, and they specifically wrote into law a phrase that said, you can mention your high school graduation in North Carolina as part of the picture, but it will not qualify you in and of itself. So, unless there's a statutory change, we have to continue to, until the student's independent, look to see that the parent is living in North Carolina. Finally, this touches on some of the conversation we had recently about campus responsibilities about monitoring. The grace period, again, I want to remind you, if the student makes you aware, or you otherwise become aware that the family has moved out of state, all right, you need to work with RDS, particularly if they're getting a grant, because they can continue for 12 months from that date of the change to get in-state tuition. It effectively becomes like an out-in, but we need to code that at our end that they're not trying to use that at another institution, but also they would lose eligibility moving forward for state grants. So if that comes out after that it wasn't reported, you may have some issues of having to go back to get funds from the student. So make sure you're looking at that. And then the other campus tracking that came up on this call is that there are a few cases that you do have to track, and they're very limited. One that we talked about was the VA that is tied to a benefit. So if someone had a benefit and they used it up, that, they had to either come back to RDS to see if they now qualify for residency, which in theory they should after a year, because they're supposed to be working toward it, or revert to the out-of-state rate. Likewise, other campus exceptions you give, Many of them have a strict time limit. Like the one for the third-party employer paying, that's only for each term that they pay directly. Or like that high school graduate, U.S. citizen high school graduate, that is only good for 12 months from the date of graduation. And then they would revert to the non-resident. So that's where that campus responsibility guide can help you with that. Likewise, the expiring visas, that's the one that we flag with a particular code because they don't always get renewed. Some students age out of the visa and would have to try to qualify for another. So we flag those. So review the guidebook, but at least once a year, you want to be taking a look at those categories that require tracking when there's an exception, you know, that there's something in place that might end. So that can be done through queries. If you have questions, you know, let us know. We can help you with that. And that's all I have, unless there's any questions.
No questions? All right. I told you this is going to be the fastest meeting you've had before. So I will open the floor up again for a moment, see if there's any questions that anyone may have. All right. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop recording. I know sometimes people have questions.